Up next on Outlook, you know, every week we come to you in an effort to help preserve the art of conversation. We do it one story at a time. Well, on today's Outlook, stories helping to shape the collective local lore. We call it A Taste of History. Coming up next, we add to the annals of local lore an historic convention of international magnitude as thousands of Bosnians converge on the city of Bowling Green over the Memorial Day weekend. We'll take a look at that. In addition, we are going to learn more about an effort underway to collect oral histories dedicated to the most famous madam who helped to put Bowling Green on the map. The story of Pauline coming up next on Outlook. Hello and welcome to Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're glad you joined us. Well, on the show today, we're going to bring you a taste of history, starting with most recent history. Over the Memorial Day holiday weekend, if you were in these parts of the city, you may have noticed that there were quite a few people, quite a few travelers, thousands of people, as a matter of fact, of Bosnian descent, who converged upon Bowling Green as part of the annual Bosniak Convention. To date, Bowling Green will be the smallest city that's ever hosted this international event, which included, as part of the festivities, the dedication of a mosque and cultural performances aplenty, plus a whole lot more. We'd like to learn more about that as we welcome to the program organizer Gina Dzelil. Thank you so much for being here. In addition, we are joined by WKU sociology professor Daday. Now, there's a connection between Western and the fact that the two of you work together. But before we go any further and find out about the Bosnian Convention, let's find a little bit about the Bosnian people. What would you say if someone said, sum up for me in a few words the Bosnian culture? I know that would be difficult, but what are some characteristics that we might find?
First of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited. The Bosnian culture is a very welcoming and hospitable culture. Bosnian people enjoy music, festivals. We love to cook out and eat food. As most of you guys know, we have plenty of Bosnian restaurants here locally. We're also very welcoming, family-oriented people. We take our time sitting down, chatting, you know, meeting new people, and being with our families.
Hardworking?
Yes, definitely hardworking. Bosnian people are very, very hardworking.
And like to drink coffee.
Yes, we drink coffee a lot.
Like to drink coffee.
Not as much here as we do back home. People back home drink way more than we do here. But
well, help us understand now this convention of Bosnians, and I've seen it spelled and pronounced Bosniaks with a K at the end.
Yes.
Still meaning the same thing, but just a variation, or?
Bosniaks are more of the Bosnian population that is by religion a Muslim, so belongs to the Islamic faith. And they are the Bosniaks. However, Bosnian people were all welcome to this convention, regardless of what religion and what culture. And there was many, many participants from different religions too, as well.
Well, let's talk about that, because many of the Bosnians practice a particular kind of religion in general.
Yes.
And this is Jerry. Pipe in here. Help us get a sense, you know, sociologically how this stacks up.
Well, there were three main religious groups in Bosnia. There's the Bosniaks, or the Bosnian Muslims. There's also Bosnian Serbs who practice the Eastern Orthodox faith, and then there's Bosnian Croats who practice the Roman Catholic faith. So there still are three main religious groups in Bosnia today, and have been in Bosnia for the last 500, 600 years.
Well, let's talk about the Bosnians coming to the United States, and that influx began in the 1900s, but then a lot of Bosnians came to the United States when the war of the mid-90s was taking place. That was 1992 through 1995.
Right.
In Bosnia-Herzegovina, you'd hear a lot of that in the news. So that was 15 years ago that you came to Bowling Green.
Yes,
you were a child?
Yes, I came to Bowling Green in 1998. Before that, I lived in Berlin, Germany. So I kind of had a step over before I got here. But yeah, I came here in 1998.
Well, she's saying that because prior to this, I remember you sharing that story with me, because you lived in Berlin, a huge, major, culturally rich, amazing city, and then all of a sudden you're transplanted as a young girl to a place called Bowling Green, Kentucky, very rural, very different in many regards. So that had to be a tough transition.
Oh, that was definitely very challenging. I was 17 years old when I came here, so I started my second semester of junior in high school, and that was very, very hard to adopt. I didn't speak English very well at that time, so it was definitely a culture shock.
So for this Bosnian convention, what we get is a lot of individuals in the Bowling Green area already. The Bosnian population here numbers what? I don't even have
About 5,000 is the
about
estimate.
5,000. Okay. And so then what this convention brought together, people from all over the world converged on Bowling Green to participate. Why is this so special? Why is this so significant for our local history?
Well, this convention started 17 years ago, where Bosnian people come together to celebrate their accomplishments. So when it came to Bowling Green, after 17 years, it has quite a bit of publicity, so people were just excited to come here, and it was Bowling Green is in the center of the United States, so it was very easy to attend this convention. So we had people actually even from Sydney, Australia, come. We had people from Norway, people from all over Bosnia, and of course people from all over the United States and Canada.
And so speaking of Canada, the first convention of this nature, of this group, was held in Toronto in 1996?
Yes.
Okay, and the need for this is what? To get people together, to share in the culture?
Yes, to remember our heritage, to pay tribute to our ancestors, to just remember where we come from, to also share our accomplishments. If somebody has published a new book, or if you have somebody that has created something, we can share with each other. Also to just gather, families come together that once a year. I've seen family this weekend I haven't seen in 4 or 5 years. So this is the opportunity where everybody gets together, and also to introduce our culture to different areas in the United States, like Bowling Green, and to bring the Bosnian American culture closer to our American neighbors.
We talked a little bit about how the war, the 1992-1995 war. Help us get a sense. You were a young girl.
Yes.
And in your place where you grew up was suddenly torn by war.
Yes, luckily I was in the war only during the first couple of weeks. I was fortunate enough to escape, but I do remember moments of that where it was terrible. Yeah.
And have you been back to your country, Bosnia?
Yes,
since?
I've been back a few times visiting. Most of my family still lives there, so I go quite ever so often to visit them and just, go back to my old home that actually burned to the ground. It has been remodeled, but we go every now and then. Nobody lives there now, just to remember. It's like a dream when you go there. It's like you remember it, but you really don't. But it's always a part of you.
Always a part of you.
Yeah.
And so the new Bosnia, what you see there now, a better place? Would you ever consider going back?
It's definitely a better place. I would love to go back every year to visit. Unfortunately, that is not something that we can afford to do. But every opportunity I do have to go visit my family and old friends, I like to do that. But this is where I live now, and this is my home here in Bowling Green.
Well, and she wanted to showcase her home, Gina Dzelil did, and it was her, who really helped to instigate getting this international convention to Bowling Green. Yes. So briefly kind of summarize how that came to be. You knew that the Bosniaks met every year across the world, and you thought, well, why not come to Bowling Green?
Well, we were actually contacted by them, and the Islamic Center was just getting built, and we were going to have the grand opening. So when the main organizers of these events learned about that, they suggested, oh, why don't we do it in Bowling Green? However, they didn't really know that we exist here as much either. So when they came to visit, they were very shocked and surprised of our accomplishments, and that there is such a nice and welcoming community here of Bowling Green, which they were very excited about. And that's why it was such a great success.
And I want to talk a little bit about that. And Jerry, you can help us understand this, because there was immediately when word got out that they were going to be dedicating an Islamic center, people maybe who didn't understand. And that's why something like this, I guess, is good to help others understand different cultures. But there was a lot of negative publicity surrounding this event. Help us understand that.
Yeah, that's kind of unfortunate that people overreacted, and some folks overreacted in our community. But by and large, I think the people of Bowling Green are very welcoming to people from all over the world, especially the Bosnian community. They're the entrepreneurs of our community. They've built restaurants, trucking companies. They're incredibly successful. And I think this was a unique opportunity to showcase those successes. The Bosnian Islamic Center is an amazing structure, and it was self-funded. Gina, 200 families, 200 individuals contributed
200 families. And we've got pictures of that. Well, before we get going, we have quite a few pictures, and so let's take a look at some of these. This first picture is at the opening ceremonies, if you will, of the International Convention that was held over the Memorial Day weekend in Bowling Green, and you see people in a very festive mood, but in the background you see the mosque. They're like coming from...
No, they're actually going to the mosque.
To the mosque.
That is when, after the opening ceremony, after us speaking, we got out from the stage that was on the other end of the field, and then we just walked towards the mosque where we had the ribbon cutting ceremony.
Well, and you mentioned a very festive people, the Bosnians are in general. They love to dance, they love colorful clothing, and in these photos that we see next, we see the dancing. You know, the girls with the hats, and you said those were representative from New York?
Yes, I think those girls were from New York. We had people from, again, I think we had 9 or 10 teams that are in the folklore dance competition that came to perform that Saturday afternoon.
And then the young people dancing?
Yes, those are actually our local kids here. I think they go here to elementary schools. They were born here, and they are actually a team from Bowling Green.
And then we have the adult, like the little bit older girls.
Yes, those girls also grew up here in Bowling Green, went to Moss Middle School. Actually, some of them are now in Warren Central High School, and they're actually also all from Bowling Green.
And then we see the mosque, and this is, you know, the people just waiting to get into the mosque. And then we have a picture of the mosque itself. It's very impressive. It's located on Russellville Road, 6880, in part of Bowling Green. And 200 families came up with the money to make this happen?
Actually, a little bit less than 200 families, and I might add, it's on Blue Level Road. And it was we just raised the money, and we needed a center to practice our faith, but more than that, to be at a cultural center where we can all learn about our culture and where we can teach others about who we are, where we come from.
Well, and then there was a concert that night, there was a dinner that night. The president of Bosnia was to have been here. He was, and I think a lot of people were disappointed when NATO doings in Chicago kind of prohibited that.
Yes, there was a few days before there was a NATO meeting, and there was protests where they had to immediately return home, and unfortunately he was not able to attend, but he did send us a 2-page letter apologizing, and maybe he'll make it up to us one day.
Maybe one day. Well, we're quickly running out of time, but when we look back at this opportunity that Bowling Green was afforded, when we look at it from an historical standpoint, what it means to the local lore, what do we say? You know, having thousands of Bosnians converge on this city, what did that mean for our city?
Oh, I think it's amazing. Bowling Green opened its doors to all these people to show them that we are a small community and that we can compete with big cities like Chicago and Toronto. And something that Mayor said as well that night, we might not have everything they do have, but we do have the Southern hospitality here in Bowling Green. So I think that we proved that.
And Jerry, what do you want to add to that?
I just echo what Gina said. I really think this was a positive for the Bowling Green community, for WKU. We did some educational programming here for the week leading up to the convention, engaged students, faculty. I think it was a great thing all around, and hopefully we can establish a much stronger connection between WKU and the Bosnian community here in Bowling Green.
And the WKU did not hesitate to participate. They really saw it as a learning because of you.
Gina approached President Ransdell. He was very supportive. Dean David Lee in my college, and this was an honor and privilege for me to help put together the educational program at WKU. It was one of the highlights of my professional career, so I was ecstatic that Gina contacted me.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. We've been
talking
talking with Dr. Jerry Daday and Gina Dzelil about the most recently completed Bosnian convention that was held over Memorial Day weekend in Bowling Green. Now, when we come back, we're going to continue our local lore as we find out more about Pauline's, that one, next on Outlook. Outlook continues, and we're taking a look at local lore, taking a look at history. And we can't talk about the local lore without talking about Pauline Tabor, who ran a house of ill repute for nearly 4 decades in Bowling Green, kind of put Bowling Green on the map in a lot of circles. Well, right now, an area library, the Kentucky Museum, as a matter of fact, is looking to collect oral histories related to Pauline's. We're going to share more of that story as we welcome to the program 2 historians. You may know Nancy Baird, Professor Emeritus of WKU. In addition, we are joined by Mary Lucas, also an historian and retired from Western Kentucky University. So welcome and thank you for sharing this story, because as we mentioned, it's still a bit controversial. There are some people who don't like to talk about it, don't want to be affiliated with the story. And why do you think that is to this day?
But history is history.
Thank you.
Whether you approve or not, it's there. It was there.
And that's the story we're going to share today. Pauline Tabor, you know, it was the Great Depression. She was 28 years old. She was a divorced mother of 2. She had to make a living. So she went back to Louisville and she tried door to door. And you mentioned, Mary, she was an Avon lady?
That was one of the first things she tried after she divorced to support her family, was to sell Avon cosmetics door to door, but she just couldn't make enough that way, and she decided to go into a more lucrative business. And she actually went down to a house of prostitution in Clarksville, Tennessee, where she stayed for a week or so and learned the trade. And she came back, and in 1933, she opened her first house in Bowling Green, and 1933 was, according to historians, the worst, deepest year of the Depression, but she made a living right off the bat.
So take us back to that time as we know it in Bowling Green. Bowling Green, if you're familiar with it now, was nothing like that, I'm sure, in 1933. So the roadways were different, you know, even the geography was different.
The first sewers in Bowling Green, for example, were built by the WPA in the late 30s. So, I mean, we didn't even have sewers. It was a very small town, somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 20,000.
And this house of ill repute, known as Pauline's, was located where in the Bowling Green geography?
Down on the other side of the railroad tracks. It was, well, originally there was one out in the county, but down by the railroad tracks. And she was very much interested in making sure it was not near families. There were no families living next door, which I think was probably pretty smart.
So is it Clay Street?
Clay Street.
Okay, Clay Street, so it is where it was located. It no longer exists, and we'll tell you more about that story, how it was demolished. But Mary, help us get a sense of Pauline Martin Tabor Webster. Okay, what kind of woman was she? Because you got to admit, she made a living in for 40 years, for 4 decades. So she was a savvy businesswoman as well.
She was always a good businesswoman, and she did everything with an eye to profit, but she was also an entertaining person, an interesting person to be around. She loved talking to people, visiting with people, and was good to the people of this community. She made many friends in her area, which was down close to the railroad tracks, across Main Street, 627 Clay Street. It was also close to the St. Joseph Catholic Church. And those families down there, many of them were Irish immigrants, and they sometimes had a hard time. And if a family needed help, a house burned, a child was sick, she gave them the money. She was a very public-spirited citizen.
Very philanthropic
Yes, she
as well.
was.
Where was she born and raised?
Right here in Bowling Green.
So she came
Yes.
back home.
Yes, she was not a child of poverty or neglect. She was from a middle-class family. Her father worked for the tobacco market, and she was not a little neglected child that you might expect maybe to end up owning a brothel, but she did very well at it.
The stories abound if you've ever heard of Pauline Tabor. I remember first moving here from the Chicago area. I'd been here a month, went back home, was in a hair shop, and when I told a woman I lived in Bowling Green, that was the first thing she said. That's where that famous whorehouse was located, is what she called it. And so it put Bowling Green on the map in many ways.
Well, during World War II, there were a number of military bases nearby, and the soldiers on the weekends would go to various towns, and many of them came to Bowling Green, and that was one of the attractions. So when they went back home, they talked about Bowling Green and Pauline's, and a la her worldwide fame.
Uh-huh. Now, there was something called the May Act, Mary, that you shared with us. Help us understand that.
Well, the soldiers coming from Fort Campbell and Fort Knox really began sort of the perils of Pauline as far as the legal community was concerned. An older lawyer here once told me that before World War II, it was a sort of live and let live situation as far as the community was concerned about Pauline's, but with the influx of all of those soldiers, it was a whole new ballgame because there was a federal law, a health law called the May Act, and under those provisions there could not be a house of prostitution within 100 miles of an Army base. So, you know, she was right between Fort Campbell and Fort Knox, and that threw her into all kinds of problems, and the legal community was told to close her down or the Army would, and so that began a series of court appearances with local law enforcement, lawyers, judges, policemen trying to get her closed down, but it never worked. She was closed down for temporarily several times, but they never really put her out of business. And I've been told by men who were in college in the late 40s that if they knew Pauline was going to be in court that day with Rhodes Myers, who was her defense attorney, defending her, they'd cut classes at Western to go see the show. It was better than Law and Order on TV. But if she was there, there wasn't much order. One day she was sitting in the witness box and she looked out over the courtroom and she said, "Well, I've seen every man in this room at one time or another down at my house, except the judge." So she let him off. But she was an interesting, funny, but capable. She knew how far she could go, and she ran a, what I guess would be called a good house.
Exactly. And like I say, the stories abound because there's one very popular story about the milk cans. The positioning of the milk cans outside the house on Clay Street was indicative of whether or not she was closed and or open. Who wants to tell that story?
Dan,
I'll
your turn, Dan.
Oh, well, to tell people whether she was or was not open, she had a milk can, and if it was blocking the driveway, in the middle of the driveway, they were closed. If it was on the porch, they were open. The problem was that the college boys liked to steal the milk cans. It was part of the tradition, I guess, and rite of passage.
Sure.
And so finally she chained it to the porch so that it couldn't be stolen.
But that was the way you knew if it was safe, if she
Safe.
was open, or if it was closed. Now, the reason we're talking about Pauline Tabor and this famous bordello in Bowling Green is because the Kentucky Museum is collecting oral histories. Now, Mary, you brought up an interesting point. Even to this day, as we alluded to in the beginning, some people are reluctant to talk about it. They don't feel comfortable. They don't want to be associated with it. And yet, from an oral historian's point of view, it would be really nice to hear some of these stories.
We would like to get more stories. They've been collecting the stories at the Kentucky Library, and Jonathan Jeffries, I believe, is in charge of that program. And if anyone has stories, they'd be so happy if you'd be willing to share them at the library, and it could all be very confidential. You wouldn't have to say your name. You could just tell the story, and they'd be very happy to have them, which is very different from what the reception of Pauline's book was. When the book first came out in the 70s, once her house was closed down, she wrote a book, and I think Nan was on the library staff when that book came out.
The library was told that book would not be in Western's library. That was the official message that came from the president of the university. The head of the Kentucky Library just bought a copy, put it in the bottom drawer of his desk, and when the administration changed, the book appeared in the library, was cataloged, and sits on the shelf. And if you want to read it, you're welcome to go to the Kentucky Library and read it. You can't check it out, but you can read it.
It's called Pauline's by
It's called-
Pauline Tabor.
yes.
It is. And so these oral histories are important to you know, just keep the local history, the local lore alive, and that can be done at the Kentucky Museum. And you would encourage people. And you've never been able to talk with any of her girls, any of the girls that worked for her?
No, I've collected all kinds of stories, and I give a program in many clubs on Pauline, and I've never yet given one that someone didn't come up after the program and give me a new story that I hadn't heard before. So that's what we're hoping, is that people will feel free to go over to the library and tell their stories.
Fascinating, colorful story, part of the lore of the Bowling Green area. Thanks to both of you, Mary Lucas, Nancy Baird, for sharing more information about Pauline's and the request for oral histories for stories related to Pauline Tabor. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of Outlook. I'm Barbara Deeb, and as always, we're glad you joined us.